Any thoughts on using AI K8sGPT for proactive tasks like cost optimization recommendations? Tools like Carpenter get you very far, but in terms of the pod and the container config, there is space.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting opportunity to explore. You would need more contextual information about the environment you're running in. One of the things that I was super keyed in on was getting K8sGPT to run on any Kubernetes, right? So we don't really care whether it's an EKS or a kind or a Minikube. But to actually get cost information, you need to have some context of, am I running in a cloud? What are the costs of this cloud? Am I running locally? What are the cycles that I'm using CPU-wise? What you could do is to say, I'm not going to measure it in costs, in monetary costs. I'm going to measure it in CPU cycles and memory cycles. And that we could do without having any sort of cloud. For example, looking at utilization, right? Saying you're running 5 pods, but only 3 of those have received traffic in the last 15 minutes. Therefore, we think you could scale down. This is absolutely on the roadmap. You may have seen that we package these things called analyzers, which are Golang-based little units or modules. We can do that, but what that requires is to use the operator, right? Because you need historical data. And any sort of cost modeling usually needs historical data rather than just looking at a misconfiguration. So as the operator has come out, we're starting to see that it's opening up new behaviors and opportunities. We have already a bunch of custom resources that you can have in the cluster called results. Now, what we're also looking at is this kind of idea of having results over time, so you can precisely pick out those kind of things. I actually started more recently an investigation into the events, looking at cluster events. Like, why am I seeing more cluster events? And rather than looking at events themselves, I'm working with Prometheus, because K8sGPT also supports this idea of integrations. And it's pretty new, right? We've just sort of built this out with Trivy as an example, but we're also building an integration with Prometheus to say, okay, well, here's a bunch of statistical data that Prometheus has recorded over time, because precisely to what you were saying, CPU use is super low. Let's make a suggestion. Let's bring that up as a report that could potentially be a cost-saving exercise. So absolutely, yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, that's the integrations thing seems like a potential gold mine, because when I, just using it right out of the box, it's like, okay, here's what the APIs are reporting. Here's some things that might be an issue. Here's how you can tackle those. And I was like, that's great. And then I was like, I really wanted to read my logs. Like, I wanted to read my logs. And it seems like, is there a hookup to read logs today, or is that not available yet? Because that's very consuming. I mean, there's a huge amount of logs to parse through, and that actually becomes kind of costly with GPT, doesn't it?
It was a really conscious decision not to pull log data because it has a lot of PII in it. Going back to the way the anonymize function works, is anything that is recognizable that gets sent to an AI will be effectively transposed to a hash, so that it's not identifiable to you. We couldn't guarantee that at the time of log. Something will always slip through, right? There's log parsing is based off a regex, and you'll get something wrong inevitably. So rather than get it wrong and break trust, don't have that as a feature. That's kind of the modus operandi that I work under. Now, what would be interesting is, as to your point around logs, is K8sGPT, tell me the summary of this log, right? Like, I give you permission, that's fine. I'm using a local model, kind of an opt-in kind of thing. Like, almost like, rather than anonymize, it would be, allow remote access kind of thing, and say, yeah, go have a look at the logs of this pod and tell me in more precision what's the matter. And this also gives you a bit of insight into how we actually get our data. For most of the issues that we find, it's a combination of the event, the description of the issue, and looking at the contextual data of the replica set, right? So are you on, has your pod failed? Has it failed on a node that has gone down? Has it failed because of an event? Is it a PVC that's unbound? And so a lot of the analyzers actually have sublogic inside of them to go and check what's going on in K8s. We could very much expand that to say, well, I'm actually interested in just finding out what happened in the logs. That's something I want to add to it. So we could say, K8sGPT, analyze -- explain -- with logs. Like, I give you permission, use the log data as well. And that would give you a whole bunch of extra information that might be useful. The reason I haven't done that, and we haven't done that, is just because we want to be really sure that we're not sending up stuff that you might get, worried about being up in the cloud. But yeah, absolutely, it could be a feature that we end up building.
Yeah, this is kind of a cool use case Carlos brings up. He says, I'm hooking my home lab to power consumption monitoring with a smart power switch. I would like to hook that to K8sGPT. So there are extensions. I haven't looked at like that API and how it works, but is that pretty easy to do if Carlos wanted to contribute that and add one?
Yeah, it's super easy. It's super easy. So the integrations actually on docs.k8sGPT.ai have just started to be fleshed out in our explanations page. But actually writing an integration is so easy. There's a couple hooks, you know. There's like a deploy, undeploy, which is optional, but then there's like an analyze, and you get passed through everything you need into the analyze function. You get a Kubernetes client, you get context about what's going on. And yeah, you could go off and call whatever, right? You could call a smart switch and figure out, you know, what is the current power consumption? You could then say, well, this is the power consumption. This is my cluster. Correlate the two. Yeah, so it's something that certainly I would love to see, and I'm happy to work with to make happen.
Yeah, or as Carlos points out, if he could have it just report events against the node and add labels or things like that, that's not so bad either. It would probably get you halfway there.
Yeah, and actually, this is why we don't just have a CLI, right? Because a CLI is kind of a one-shot static thing, whereas the operator could be something that you have an integration with the operator, and that does the consistent updating of the current labels or the power consumption, as you say, on a label on a node. I really think that you could take this in endless directions. I'm very much trying to not do that too soon, because I think if you do one thing well, it's better than doing a bunch of stuff not very well. But I think we can be thoughtful and think about integrations that help the community at large, aren't too complicated to make work and to maintain, then I think you've got a winner.